Well, hello, everybody. My name is TJ. I'm the Director of Partnerships at the Elections Group. For anyone who is joining us for the first time, the Elections Group partners with state and local election officials to implement new programs and improve processes for voters and other stakeholders. We are a team of election experts supporting election professionals through collaboration, thought leadership, and elevating best practices. Everybody at the Elections Group has worked in election offices, so we know firsthand the challenges faced by election officials. We use our real-world expertise to help others solve challenges. For anybody who does not know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. That is what has brought us to this topic. Just as a disclaimer, this conversation that we're going to share today is intended to raise awareness and share practical non-clinical strategies. No medical or therapeutic advice will be provided. If you are struggling with your mental health, I implore you, I encourage you, please, please, please seek help from a licensed professional. And now that we've gone through that, I am so excited to turn things over for intros to our three wonderful panelists. We have Sam Novy, who's the Chief Strategist at the University of Maryland Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement. We have Kathy Placencia, who is the Director of Elections at the Rhode Island Secretary of State. And last, but certainly not least, Tina Barton, who's a senior election expert at the Elections Group and is also the co-chair of the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections. I'm going to turn it to Sam to give a little bit of an intro beyond that.
Sure. So as TJ mentioned, I'm Sam Novy. I'm the Chief Strategist at the Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement at the University of Maryland. We have been studying, different strategies for strengthening the elections workforce over the past couple of years. And one, lens that we've been bringing to this topic is that, while there's obviously lots of things that make running elections hard that we don't always control. We can't always control if people are going to come, make harassing calls at our offices. We can't control if the courts are going to change the rules for running our elections in ways that create enormous amounts of work for election officials right before the election. There's all sorts of things we don't control, but there are a number of things that we do control. And so as we've been, getting into this research, we've been really excited about some really high impact opportunities where, maybe election officials can't address all the factors driving burnout in their office, but there are some really concrete things that folks can do. So I'm really excited to talk about that more on the call today.
Awesome. All right, Kathy.
Kathy Placencia, the Director of Elections for the Rhode Island Secretary of State, Department of State. I've been in this role for about 2 years. Prior to this, I was the Administrator of Elections for the City of Providence, the largest municipality in Rhode Island, for about 17 years. Tina may mention, mental health and talking about mental health is very important to me. Because, after 2020, I think that, with elections just being more in the map, it's just something that we just need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and that we know that we have a community of, like-minded people that are in this field that, your families may not understand. So to me, this is just always a hot topic.
Love it. Love it. All right, Tina.
Thanks, TJ. Excited to be on with these wonderful people and what they're going to bring to the conversation. Before joining the Elections Group, I spent 32 years working in local government, with the last about 20 years of my career being really focused on election administration. Found myself after the 2020 election cycle receiving a death threat that was obviously very unexpected. Found myself just, thought that I had really kind of dealt with the emotion of it, and then found myself just months later realizing I was living in a state of hypervigilance and that I really needed to talk to someone, and hadn't really had that come to Jesus conversation with myself that I can't do all of this alone, and that I was struggling mentally and emotionally with it. And so this has been a real kind of personal passion of mine to talk about this and to bring awareness of this in our profession and just kind of make sure we're supporting each other.
Thank you, Tina. Well, I'm going to jump right into questions for folks. I think, as you all have mentioned, that the topic of burnout is unfortunately a familiar one in election circles, and we've seen different examples among friends and colleagues. Going to each of you, maybe starting with Kathy, who's still in the business. How do you define burnout in the context of election administration?
I don't know that there's a real true definition of being burnt out, because I think, there's that physical exhaustion, of course, the mental exhaustion. But I think that we're so much on autopilot that we may not even realize that we're burnt out until after the election, when you have that time to actually take a deep breath, take it all in, and then just basically crawl into a ball and cry because of, you've made it. You've gotten past this election cycle. And I think, to me, there is no real definition other than like Tina said, you have that come to Jesus moment where you're just like, now you feel that burnout after it's happened.
Sam, and I should say Sam, I think, has dual affiliations. He's also the secretary of the Baltimore City Board of Elections, though he's here in his UMD affiliation. I just didn't mean to slight you, Sam, in saying that you weren't among the cool election officials or election
That's
support
okay. That's
folks.
okay, TJ. In this capacity, I'm here definitely as a faculty member at University of Maryland. Yeah. So in terms of how we've tried to think about this problem as a center, we're part of the political science department, but we understand that there's a lot of expertise we need to engage, both from folks in the field working as election officials and from other disciplines that think about these issues related to mental health and mental health in the workplace. And so we worked with Mara Sutman-Lee, who is a professor at Connecticut College, who some of you may know, to scan the literature around burnout and find what we felt was really applicable in our space. And there's a definition of burnout that we've been using in our work that I think is helpful here in kind of understanding what the experiences Kathy and others have been talking about here. So there's sort of 3 steps to becoming burned out. The first is exhaustion, right? So this is where the demands of your service recipients, right, the people you're trying to serve, exceed your capacity to serve them. So think about a teacher who has too many students in their class, a doctor who has more patients than they could possibly see in a day, an election official who has just too many things than they could possibly do. They are exhausted. And when people become exhausted, particularly in sort of human service types of organizations, they experience something called, in the literature, depersonalization, right? Where you stop seeing the people you serve as like unique human beings who have unique problems that you can address, and sees them as sort of impersonal objects as of work, because that's just the only way you can start to sort of manage and sort of triage in the exhausted state you're in. And when folks go through that stage of depersonalization, the final phase is what they call inefficiency, right? So your exhaustion and depersonalization of your work cultivate a sort of sense of cynicism and erode your feelings of pride and accomplishment. And when folks start having their sense of pride and accomplishment erode, they stop trying as hard, basically, and stop putting the care into the work that makes them effective, and they get even less efficient, right? Which then contributes to the exhaustion. So you can get into sort of a downward spiral. And so we thought that sort of definition, that those steps of exhaustion, depersonalization, inefficiency, kind of can help us think about and define the problem in our field.
Tina, do you have, I mean, I think that these are things that we've either seen or, understand intuitively. Any remarks after what Kathy and Sam have said?
Yeah, just thinking about in the difference between stress and burnout. I mean, people often, kind of, I think, conflate the two. And really, stress is that too much of everything, or too many demands, too many things pulling at you, all of that. And really, burnout is that not enough energy, not enough mental capacity, not enough even passion about it anymore. And I think it's appropriate that Kathy is here with us today, because when I was thinking how could you just put it in a small phrase that, even just the title of the film that she was in, No Time to Fail, right? that to me in and of itself is like if you're thinking about elections, kind of is a really good explainer on burnout, because there's no time to fail. And so all these other factors come into it, which then leads to the burnout, because there's never going to be enough to satisfy all those things because you don't have time to fail in the meantime.
Yeah, that first Tuesday after the first Monday in November on an even year will always come regardless. And I think that is something that makes election work different, right? Like any other job, you can kind of kick the can down the road and say, hey boss, I need another week. And obviously a complicating factor within elections. Right. Kathy, I'm going to turn to you and just, is there anything that you do formally, informally, evaluations, whatever it might be, that you do with the intention of checking in on folks about their morale, about their sense of burnout?
Yeah. So one thing that we kind of developed here in our office is to make sure that we have those weekly check-ins. And it doesn't have to necessarily be on a weekly basis. It can be a couple of times a week, as many times as it's needed, with the amount of phone calls that we're getting on a daily basis. I mean, it's nonstop. We were able to get voicemail this year, which is something that we didn't have in this department. And having those check-ins when we're just sitting in the office having a meeting, but really checking in with each other, making sure that we're good, and just and letting those phones ring, because we're going to return those calls. We're going to get to the emails. We are going to get to them, but it's important that we kind of sit back and just have general conversation about what's going on. Okay, how are you feeling? What can we do to support each other? Those are things that we kind of, developed this time around. As this was my first election, my first election here in this capacity. So that was very important, and it was efficient for us. It was necessary for us to do as a team here, make sure that we're good, because we need to be good.
That's excellent. Sam, I'm looking to you, based on your research, based on what you've seen, thinking about what Kathy just said, what are those low lift, high impact strategies folks can use to,
Yeah. So, I mean, so basically there's a lot of literature to support that what Kathy is talking about there is not just the like intuitive human kind thing to do, but also an extremely effective strategy for making your team more effective and efficient, right? So we were talking before about the downward spiral, right, where you go from exhaustion to depersonalization to inefficiency and burnout, but there's also an upward spiral where agency is the antidote to burnout, right? And so when people feel like they have agency at work, they feel that they have some control. They're able to set boundaries, right? So say, we're going to let those phones ring, right? That's setting a boundary, right? So people are able to set boundaries and accept the challenges that are coming at them, because in elections, as TJ was saying, the challenges come at you, and you have to you have to accept the challenge and figure out how you're going to make it work in a limited amount of time. And so when folks set those boundaries, they accept those challenges, they're able to act authentically at work and express themselves honestly. And then that creates a workplace where people feel connected, able to accept challenges, able to process anger productively, and not feeling burned out and quitting, right? So that's the upward spiral, that the literature suggests is possible. And what's really exciting is that the types of things that feel small that Kathy is talking about, they set off that upward spiral, right? That kind of high quality listening gets that virtuous cycle going. And so, there's a couple of things we talk about here: debriefs, whether in the moment, that kind of weekly debrief that Kathy's talking about, or especially after the election, giving people a space to process their experiences, give feedback that really matters. Staff surveys matter, that kind of thing. The other thing we've been looking at is succession planning, right? Is that sometimes, a job that was not exhausting for somebody one year is exhausting for somebody in a different year. And so we need to support people in not continuing to remain in roles that might have been a fit in the past, but aren't a fit right now. And that's also sort of part of making sure that we've got a team and a workplace that's set up for the challenges we've got right now.
Tina, I'm thinking about your work through the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections and how you've connected law enforcement, connected other parts of government to election offices. And I'm hearing what Sam says about these check-ins and stuff, but I can imagine, for the leaders within offices who don't necessarily have someone that they're looking up to say, hey, I need help, that those cross-government relationships could perhaps kind of serve as a stand-in. Is there anything you want to say just generally about that?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. And it's what's been interesting in this work with elections and law enforcement is really to see how many things that we parallel each other on. I like to say we're both, professions that are under attack, we're under-resourced, and we're, under the microscope, all three professions. The other thing that I would say too, I have seen is this struggle with mental resiliency and mental wellness. That is something that the law enforcement also is struggling with because of all of those other factors. So finding commonalities across there to have those conversations, maybe even having a conversation of, hey, I know there are high suicide rates in law enforcement. Can we talk about what you all are doing in your profession that maybe we can implement here in the elections community to help recognize when teammates are struggling, to help provide them the right resources and direction, and to make ourselves more empathetic and aware of what's going on around us, and also that transparency and honesty that if you're feeling, as the leader, feeling tired, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling exhausted, then most likely your staff is also. And so being aware of what's going on even within yourself and recognizing that's probably going on with them, and how can I best resource them? And sometimes that just means reaching across the building to another department or another division that is going through the same types of stressors that you are, and seeing how they're handling it.
That's excellent. I'm turning to, we've talked about listening, but the world we live in now is different than the world of 10 years ago, just from a how people work standpoint, I think. And perhaps election offices, in terms of flexibility and many of those, those new perks of work that folks enjoy, they don't necessarily get to enjoy those in the same way because elections are such a hands-on activity. Kathy, Tina, Sam, anybody, what are some ways? I personally think that flexibility is a huge thing in reducing burnout, giving folks space. What are some ways that you have or that folks could encourage flexibility, give people space in the election context? Go to anybody. Don't all fight over it.
I think it's saying just that. I think it's communicating that to your team, that you do need to take care of yourself first. And although this when you're in it, it seems like there is no time to complete all tasks, and some days there is not enough time in the day, and some things cannot wait until tomorrow. But what can't wait until tomorrow is your mental health and making sure that you're taking care of yourself. So whether it's a doctor's appointment or you just need time to get away to have your lunch or have your break or walk away from the office, you need to communicate to your team, or you should communicate to your team, that it's perfectly safe and it's okay to do that. You want to make it so you're in this together. You're a family working for the same goals, and so you just need to take care of each other in that sense.
I think we also have to lead by example. I know, Kathy, just because you and I are friends, we kind of operate the same way. We're going to work ourselves to the bone until we get something done, right? And a lot of election officials are that way. We're just, we see a job and we just will put it all on the line to make sure that it gets done. And I think that as leaders, we have to lead by example by taking those breaks throughout the day, taking a lunch hour. And that's something that I would almost never do, but recognizing it by leading an example of not doing those things and putting those expectations on your staff too, that there's a job to be done, just do, you're also, I think it brings your staff morale down, the expectations, like, so lead by example, take that break, take that lunch, just get out of the office and go outside and take a walk and get some fresh air. It's good for you in lots of ways. But I think when you lead by example on those things and actually demonstrate to them, this is what I want for you to do, so I'm going to do this, it gives them permission and it doesn't make them feel guilty when they do it.
Sam, anything there?
Yeah, I'll just as a slightly, first off, just want to co-sign what Tina and Kathy said and the importance of leading by example on this. I'll just to preview, we do have some research that Alison McLaughlin is a senior fellow at our center, who many of you know has been leading around job classifications and surge staffing. And so, I think there are some exciting opportunities sort of on the front end of all this, whereby being creative and being proactive about the kind, the way that we define jobs to begin with, both in a permanent and temporary way, that we then set people up to have responsibilities that can be accomplished by the person in that role in the time available. So that's obviously not so, once you're in the election, you're going to war with the team you got, not the necessarily the perfect setup, but in when you're in your planning phase, I think there are some exciting opportunities emerging around that job classification and surge staffing planning area where we can get ahead of some of these issues before they pop up during election time.
I want to turn a little bit of the focus to the topic of election security, operational resilience, and kind of just get everybody's sense on the call of, you can imagine a world where everybody's burned out. That is not an operationally resilient or secure place. So just on the topic of, again, security, operational resilience, how would you connect this topic with those topics? And maybe we'll go to Tina first.
Well, I think, a few things there when you're talking about resilience and burnout, it almost like, the polar opposites of each other, right? But they directly impact the other, that the ability to bounce back from adversity is really weakened by, the negative impacts that burnout has on you. So it's incredibly important to invest in resilience, whether it be through mental wellness and all of those things, so that when you are feeling that burnout and that mental and physical exhaustion, that you're able to bounce back better and easier and quicker than if you weren't investing in those things. So I think that it's important to understand, that exhaustion, that loss of motivation that you were talking about, the increased stress, all of those things, that by building resilience in your team is going to help them bounce back from all of those things quicker and easier and in a healthier way.
Kathy or Sam?
I'll just, one area that we're excited about exploring, and this was sort of in our recommendations in the initial report, is how policymakers and advocacy groups can more effectively engage with this topic, particularly around what we call bandwidth-informed legislation and litigation, right? So if you are an advocacy group or a group pushing lawsuits around elections, which obviously people, are free to do, are you approaching that work with the bandwidth and mental health of the people who implement these laws in mind, right? And a lot of time, people who I think of themselves as supporting the mental wellness of election officials end up pushing policies or pursuing their work in ways that are actually quite detrimental to the bandwidth and mental wealth or mental wellness of election agencies and elections professionals. And so I think making more clear to folks that the cost to bandwidth of a court order, of a new piece of legislation, need to be part of their calculation when they're proposing it, right? And so I think that's something where both folks in that space need to, really educate themselves about the bandwidth costs of the policies they're developing, and where maybe we can be a little bit more explicit about, what those costs are when they are coming down the pike.
I love it. And I love that you gave it a name, Sam. Like, I think election officials like feel some of those things in their bones, but you've named it. That's beautiful. Kathy, anything on those points?
I think to echo what Tina and Sam said, it's all about the communication, right? So I have so many things going through my mind. I'm sorry that I drew a blank, but it's about having that communication. It's communicating out there exactly what we do, how our job, the functions of our job, so that people understand how policies affect the administration of elections, and kind of force us to to work harder to implement these changes. So it's putting out there the work that we actually do, being transparent with our work.
Thank you, Kathy. Folks, there is a Q&A function. I see a couple questions that have come through. We're going to get to those. I encourage people, as you're listening, if you have questions, when you have questions, throw them in there. We want to get to as many as we can toward the end of this. I heard somebody mention boundaries, right? And I want to throw a question to you all. If you have someone who's brand new to the election profession, right off the street, what would you tell them about how to set boundaries? Like, what does that look like in an effective way, or in a way that allows folks to continue to do this important work?
I think you have to go back to your core values. It's important for you to know, as you're setting boundaries, what are your core values? What are the things that are most important in your life? And you can't take one and take all of the time and attention and love and efforts and passion away from the other two and still keep those other two things important. So I think that it's really about continually having those conversations with yourself of what your core values are, what your mission is for yourself personally, as well as your organization. But I think it's also a little bit of letting them know that you can't do it all by yourself. You can't do it all in one day. And you can't do it all absolutely perfect every single day, all day. So it's also about granting yourself grace, and those that you work with some grace, because you're going to need it along the way. And again, operating by example.
Fantastic. Kathy or Sam, I will say I am a usual recipient of Tina's grace. So thank you, Tina.
I think, those boundaries, it's recognizing what those boundaries mean to everyone, because not everyone will have the same or have the same boundaries, right? And I think, again, creating safe space, continuing to have a conversation, continuing to provide support for each other, because again, we're in this together. We all want the same outcome, but we don't want to get burnt out. And we, even though it does happen, but how do you, what those boundaries look like for that other person? Because those boundaries may not be my boundaries, but knowing, allowing that safety net for them to create those boundaries, what's important to that person.
Sam, anything there from your research experience?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have anything in the report that gets to this super well. I will just say, TJ, I thought, and to Tina's point about learning from some of our other public sector colleagues, I thought that there was a presentation at the Maryland Association of Election Officials last week from our the crisis intervention teams with law enforcement around the state. And one thing they talked about in terms of setting boundaries was having what they call tap out, where like often if two people from that team are dealing with a situation with someone who's not well or being very challenging, and one of the officers feels that the interaction is getting under their skin, where they can feel themselves losing control, they have a system for tapping out of the interaction and having another team member take over for a bit, so that the person who's getting triggered by it can regain their composure. I thought that was a really valuable insight, and maybe something we can learn from.
Tina, anything there? I think that's a phenomenal strategy that can
No,
be
I think
deployed.
Yeah, absolutely. The tap out concept is something that we have learned from law enforcement in some of our discussions, and that's done in de-escalation. Because like you said, when you're feeling the emotion of the moment take over really kind of what is actually happening there, and you're feeling a personal response to that, that recognizing at that moment if the personal side of me is going to interject something here that's probably not professional. And so that tapping out, but that can be used in lots of ways. Like you said, even if you're becoming too emotionally worn down or exhausted, I think tapping out is a great way to put that of, hey, I need to take a break from this because I am mentally drained from this right now. And I'm a better version of myself. I'm more creative. I am also a better problem solver when I know I've taken a quick break from this and I've given myself just a little bit of recovery time, and then come back and look at that again one more time. And so I think tapping out is a great concept for lots of things.
Phenomenal. Well, let's turn to the Q&A. We may come back to some of the other questions, but let's turn. I see in here, how can you encourage check-ins and self-assessments when many local election officials are elected and autonomous? So how do you make yeah, go ahead, Tina. I see you.
Yeah, I think that, some of that is through associations that you have in your state, clerks associations, groups like that, having that buddy system of somebody who can really kind of be that accountability partner, if you will, that you can check in with them. And so when I have joined a few new organizations, I've been connected to an accountability partner, and sometimes they're not even somebody that I knew at all. And so we've gotten to know each other, but also that time when they're saying, hey, you don't seem to be acting like yourself lately. I think TJ, maybe you and I are a little bit of accountability partners for each other, because we've had those conversations, where it's like, that's not the way you would normally respond to that. Is there something going on? How can I help you out here? So I think some of that is finding those people that you connect with, either within your organization or your state associations, where there becomes a trust there and that you, again, can hold each other accountable.
I think one of the tools that we use here and that we have used here is just a platform roundtable where we have like a selective coffee hour. I know it's not called coffee hour, but where you can name it whatever you like, and you just invite all of your local election officials to this coffee hour setting. You're on Zoom, you're kind of disconnecting from your job, right, or your function, to have a conversation. And again, we're all going through this together. We're, no one understands what we go through more than us election officials or us in this field. And just having that time to kind of connect with each other, have a conversation, whether you want to vent or just talk. Having a general conversation that doesn't have to necessarily do with work is one way to kind of check in with each other.
Sam, anything there? You're our expert.
No, I mean, I'm just trying to summarize the literature for folks. But yeah, no, I mean, I just co-sign everything Kathy and Tina said.
Excellent. I'm sorry, having you go behind them didn't give you a lot of space, so I won't do that again to you. I'm sorry. Turning to the next question in the Q&A. Kathy, they're paraphrasing something you said, which is that election offices are like family. Does that concept or that idea contribute more to the burnout challenge, or is it a helpful frame for thinking about how to deal with the challenge? I will say, before turning it to you all, I'm the kind of person, fortunately or unfortunately, who, like, the people I work with, they are the people I care about, and I think we all have different styles, and of course we come to learn those things through time. But yeah, just turning it to you guys, like, how do you meter that, knowing that people feel differently about different things and value things in different ways?
Whether they like it or not, we are family. We're doing this together. We're spending more time with each other than we are with our real blood relatives during this time, and you fight like family. You do everything together like family, you want the same outcome. So that's just it. So that we're again, whether you like it or not, this is what it is, and we have to rely on each other during these challenging times, during elections, in every day of our lives. We're relying on each other to make sure that we're getting our work done, and whether that's relying on you to to take over an assignment, or I'm delegating. There's still that accountability there for each other. So.
And I think even with our own family, I mean, like you said, you said we fight like family. I mean, there might be little things along the way that irritate you, right? Like this family member always seems to leave their pop can out on the counter and, not put it away, kind of thing. And that might irritate me, but at the end of the day, I still care about that person's success. I care about them as an individual. And I know that their success contributes to my success. So even though there might be some things that irritate you a little, like family members would, at the end of the day, we have the same goals, the same, value system of what it is that we're working for. And I think sometimes, just like when, we irritate, I've been married for like 35 years. So sometimes we irritate each other, and some days you love each other more than you do the next day, right? But you have to remind yourself of what all those reasons are sometimes, and the good about people and the process and even what you're doing. Because yeah, I mean, you are together all the time, and you're not always going to get along, and you're not always going to feel all warm and fuzzy about them. But it's, again, bringing yourself back to that core of what you're both working for.
Tina, I will end this webinar if you get into specifics about the things about me that irritate you. Go ahead, Sam.
I would just say, just to get, I mean, I think there's a lot of value in naming the kind of affinity and affection we have for our coworkers, and to the extent that using a metaphor of family helps us understand that, I think it can be helpful. That said, one of the things in the research that is really important is the importance of boundaries, right? That, like, there's a that, like, when you leave work, you actually do leave. That when you're home with your kids, you're not just on your phone texting about work. When that when you wake up in the morning, you're not immediately stressed about work from the every waking moment of the day. And so I think there can be a challenge where you start to sort of blend your, like, sense of family at work with, like, your actual family at home, and that can sort of erode the boundaries folks are talking about. So I think whether or not we use the word uh family, I think different, reasonable people can disagree about that. What is important in the literature is that there are boundaries, right, where you can leave the work behind for certain periods of time, and so whatever metaphor we use for that, and when we work in close quarters with people, sometimes those boundaries can get pushed, and so creating a workplace where those boundaries are maintained, I think, is really important. And sometimes a family sort of vibe can get in the way of that. So as long as we're not letting the family vibe get in the way of our boundaries, I think it's great. If it is, then we do start to have problems with burnout.
I love that. You gave a very measured answer, Sam. Tina and I are actively working on arranging a marriage between my son and her granddaughter. So we kind of, maybe we're not the best people for this question. And anybody who's coming back, just skip to Sam and Kathy's answers and ignore Tina and I. All right, let's turn to the next question. Peer networks. So where people can get support from others who are working in elections. What does that look like? What are examples? We've talked a little bit about associations. How do you get the most out of those relationships? Don't everybody answer at once.
I do think, so for instance, when I was a city clerk, there were probably about a half a dozen of us or so that had communities that were similar in size, that we often found ourselves at conferences and other places, kind of talking about the same problems that we were facing and dealing with the same issues. And so we all just kind of joined this, our own little group of message, where we would chat with each other and help each other along the way. And so that kind of organically came about by just listening to what other people are dealing with and what type of community they're in. I know also, I know I'm promoting the EAC here, but I think with their roundtable group that they have, that they've created like ability for people to have discussions there. And so I think that, it's looking where you already have amongst your peers of people who have similar issues, and then your associations, I think, are really impactful. And then nationally, who are you able to connect with, maybe through resources like what I was talking about through the EAC, that might connect you with people that you didn't even know existed out there.
Kathy or Sam, anything there?
Just,
I just,
go ahead, Sam.
I was gonna say to the question earlier about elected clerks or folks who are in offices of one, I do think the peer networks are particularly important important there, and thinking about how we formalize and structure that to make sure a lot of those kinds of relationships emerge organically, which is amazing because we're human beings like seeking out people going through the same thing, and so that's gonna be organic, but we want to make sure that none of our colleagues are slipping through the cracks where they, maybe they're not as outgoing, or maybe they just aren't in the magic doesn't just happen organically. And so I think being just a little bit more systematic so that we're really providing that support to everyone is a exciting area of growth for the field.
Yeah, I mean, I literally was going to echo what Tina said, and what you're mentioning, Sam, is just having these networks, and whether you're meeting each other at these, events or these gatherings, and making that connection, and it does all happen so organically here. You're sitting, with you're sitting with people you normally wouldn't see. I know that one of the things my boss always mentions is make sure that you sit with people that you don't normally sit with, and kind of just break the ice, so that you're not just kind of clinging to the people that you normally would sit with, and you're getting to meet new people, and who knows how those relationships kind of span out. So that's also important.
I love it. I love it. All right. Let's see. We've got some more questions in the Q&A. Let's see. So thinking about kind of the line level, right? Like the folks who aren't necessarily participating in conferences, who aren't getting connected across offices. I think in a lot of ways, building community at that level is much more difficult, much more resource intensive if you ever wanted to explore that. Can we talk just a little bit about how within offices, leaders, managers, those folks can do more or do better to kind of cultivate that same sense, but at a smaller scale?
There is nothing wrong with having a personal check-in with someone that you don't hear from. We deal with all of our communities, but if you're not hearing from someone, or if there's nothing wrong with having that, making sure that you check in with that person, giving them a call, say, Sarah, I haven't heard from you for a while. Is everything okay? How are you holding up? Or even just sending, a blast email, letting everyone know, like, hang in there, we're almost through. They may not communicate with you formally, but seeing that message across your screen, that means a lot to people. So I think that that's one way that you can get through to people.
Tina, Sam, anything there?
No, I'm a big supporter and promoter of doing just that, of sending people messages, checking in on them. And I think too, for those in your office, recognizing if their focus has changed, or if you're seeing more errors take place than normal, or if you see really kind of their attitude towards something changing that's different. Like you said, having those personal check-ins, I have found with staff members, when I've noticed that their work quality is not what it has been in the past, if I just say, hey, is everything okay? it's often there's something going on outside of work that they, aren't able or aren't comfortable talking with, but just letting you know, hey, I need some extra support right now. And that they know that you're willing to provide that extra support during that time. Maybe they need to take a longer lunch hour to take care of a personal matter that's taking place, or maybe they're dealing with the helping a loved one that's aging and they're trying to do work matters and do that. When you know that there's something going on there, being willing to help provide them resources that might even be beneficial outside their regular work hours to help them deal with that load. Because if they're good outside of work, they're going to be a lot better inside of work.
Just to sort of name the research that supports what you're talking about, Tina, I think the ability to express yourself authentically at work is really important here. That if people are coming to work and they don't feel like it's a space where they can be themselves, where their identity is supported, where they can speak freely, that it becomes really hard to say like, well, I'm having something going on at home, and so I need some adjustments, right? People are going to be a lot less likely to bring that up. So I think this is a really great example of what Mara was writing about in her literature review, which is that having that consistent culture of listening then enables people to express themselves authentically, and that means that when you have that kind of performance issue, you're able to hear about it, address it, and move on in a high quality way instead of getting that downward spiral going around burnout.
We've got a question here. We've touched a little bit on it, which is the idea that many of these practices, especially within offices, require a certain number of people, right? You can only check in with yourself so often. Just ask me. What are your recommendations for those smaller offices? I know we've talked about peer support networks. I know we talked about that, but those are the places where, to the point of this question, they're not relying on extra staff. They can't take time off. Like, if they're not there, the office doesn't open, the thing doesn't happen. This may be one of those questions that we don't have an answer to, but if anybody's willing to begin answering, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's certainly challenging. And again, I don't know that we have the perfect answer for that. But again, I think that is, if it's a one-person office for the clerks or the elections division, again, we did talk about the peer networks, but I don't think you can discount the importance of that relationship of the clerk in the community next to you that only has 500 people, being the one person in your area that's probably going to fully understand the pressure that you're under, fully understand that you're under resourced better than anyone else. And so trying to develop those relationships, I think it's also making sure that leadership is aware that what you're working under and your demands and requirements for your job. Maybe they actually don't know. Maybe it's time for you to give a little 5-minute explainer during your next board of trustee meeting or your city council meeting. The EAC has a great wheel of competency out there that kind of explains every single thing that you do on your job and breaks it down. And I think that's very eye-opening for leadership sometimes to see, this is exactly the load that I'm carrying, and you're asking me to do this all by myself and without resources or extra funding or extra bodies. And sometimes we have to tell people that this is what the stress we're operating under in order for them to help provide solutions. So I'm not saying that perfectly every time they're going to jump to it and help you out, but sometimes it is on us to make sure we're relaying effectively what it is we all do and the help that we need.
Kathy, Sam, anything there?
I think that those are some great points. It's talking to your leadership, and maybe you're not talking to them right then and there, but you're talking to them ahead of time to say, hey, I may need support. I'm going to need support. And then talking to your peers, and maybe it's not you talking comfortably to your leadership, but maybe talking to your peers where they can kind of provide, talk to your leadership and let them know what you're going through.
One thing I'll just mention here that for small offices that came up in some of our research during the 2024 election, and we're looking into this more broadly, is the ability to staff share with other parts of government, I think is really important. So obviously in a lot of smaller places, you're not going to have a huge election staff, but there are a number of people who work in in that city government or in that county government. And so we saw a number of sort of creative examples of that kind of sort of staff sharing with other parts of government, and that does also create sort of interesting questions about like who's in the family and who's not, in terms of setting boundaries and sort of who is team elections and who's not on team elections. But that's a really exciting area where you can get people who are like, not volunteers, not temps off the street, trusted in city government, know how to use the systems, but not requiring an FTE salary that's on your budget all year. So, but that's an exciting thing that we're looking to learn more about in the profession.
Amazing. In the Q&A, we have somewhat of a shadow panelist, Paul Gronke. He's a professor at Reed College, runs the Elections and Voting Information Center survey, a local election official survey. He says that something that they've found is implementing leadership training seminars across offices is a wonderful stand-in of sorts for some of that connection and peer-to-peer support. I'm going to go ahead to make Paul happy and put a link to their 2024 survey in the chat right now for folks to look at.
Which is excellent. It's an excellent survey.
Amazing, amazing. Well, we've got only a few minutes left. I'm wondering, I think we talked a little bit about one of these questions, which was how do you effectively communicate to your administration, your board, your county manager, your city manager, that your job is different today than it was. Tina, thank you for mentioning the EAC's Wheel of Competencies, which I've shared in the chat. Let's go to this one last question, which is how do you set personal boundaries when you're somebody's subordinate and they want you to shut up, get on with it, and worry about your life and your mental health after the election? Any strategies for how to deal with that? I don't have any good ones, so I'm sorry.
Who is their manager? I'm just,
Kathy, they don't work at the Rhode Island Secretary's office. You're good.
I mean, who can you speak to outside of your own manager that will hear you in what you need? Because I think it's important for maybe that person hasn't checked in and realized, again, we're so accustomed to working on autopilot that we ourselves may not see when we're burning someone else out because we're so burnt out. So who is maybe on their level or can maybe have that conversation with your peer to say, hey, you have to kind of take a step back and maybe check in with yourself and maybe, it's not a way of telling on them, but it's your way of caring for that person, because in turn you need to be cared for. You need to check in with yourself and make sure that you're good, because if your office is not good, that's going to reflect in your work. That's going to reflect on everything that you do in the office. And it might even trickle down to, outside of work and what you're dealing with at home or, whatever that case is. So, I think it's important that you communicate that to someone else or maybe their peers or, communication. That's just it.
I think you could start by also sharing the report that you were just talking about that Paul did, that gives a lot of good information in there about why election officials are walking away from jobs and that sort of thing. But I think it's also sometimes when it's a person in authority who maybe isn't not necessarily in the clerk's office, maybe it's your mayor, maybe it's your council, whatever it might be, of having a heart-to-heart conversation. If the goal is here for us to run free, fair elections that are accurate for our community. Set what the goal is. What is the goal? In order to achieve that goal, I'm the best version of myself when I am allowed to have, 3 hours in the evening at home with my family, when I'm allowed to get a decent night's rest. I'm the best version of myself when I can take a lunch hour. I think we have to kind of set what the goals are and then kind of remind people of how we achieve excellence. And excellence is not achieved through burnout and people losing focus and people, making errors and people being apathetic to the point where they just don't even care anymore. So we need to keep focus. We need to make sure people aren't making errors, and we make sure that people maintain that passion for the profession. And sometimes it's reminding ourselves of what the in-post goal is and how do we get there and not just survive.
Love it. Sam?
I was going to say, I think one of the big challenges that we're excited to research in our next sort of phase of this project is this question around how to communicate these bandwidth challenges to other stakeholders. Because one thing that we're observing sort of anecdotally a lot is that people outside of elections, even people who interact with elections a lot, really lack an understanding of how, of the pressures that election professionals face and the bandwidth constraints that they are operating under, and the mental health constraints they're operating under. And so to the question about like how do we communicate well about this, especially because that communication is another drain on your bandwidth, right? That's a really tough question, because there's not endless time to just be you know, explaining our job. If you spend all your time explaining your job to people, you're never going to do your job, right? And you're going to be even more burned out. So I think figuring out a, bandwidth informed way to educate media, elected officials who think they know everything about elections because they ran in one, um, advocacy groups, the public, about what the situation is. That's a really important question, and one that, I think more research is needed to really understand that.
And I see a comment in the Q&A, which is this person found themselves in a situation where their superior was like that, and it was a signal to look elsewhere. And I think that's something we've mostly left unsaid, but at the end of the day, whatever your work is, whatever your job is, it is not as important as yourself. And everybody needs to come to those personal decisions on their own in many ways. I've got our final question before we close out, which is to everybody: what is one simple, actionable change that any election officer or election official can try tomorrow to better support their team?
Check in. Continue to check in. Even after elections are over, you have to continue to check in with your team, because you never know what a person is going through, whether it's in the office, outside of the office. Just want to create that safe space and continue to check in.
I know I already said it earlier, so I'm going to say it again. And really enforce taking breaks and lunches, making sure your staff is feeling safe, to not physically safe, but just like safe in an atmosphere and a culture that they can go take that break without being judged, or they can go take that lunch hour. And so making sure that staff is doing that. And then I'm going to say one more, just making sure that the goals and the roles of all the staff members are defined. What's the goal for the entire work group, and what are everybody's defined roles? Because I think that leads to a lot of confusion and burnout and resentment when people don't understand what their role is in the greater good of getting to that goal. And so I think that that's really easy. Those are easy things to do, which can be helpful.
Sam, you want to close us out?
Here, I'll say, listen. Anything, whether it's checking in, whether it's dropping by someone's desk, the literature is just it's inspiring. It really gave, burnout can be kind of a bummer of a topic to study, and it was really exciting to read these articles where it's like, even if you're dealing with some really tough external challenges that somebody else needs to address, if we just start with listening, small acts of listening, checking in, we can arrest that downward spiral of burnout and start the virtuous cycle of agency. And so, yeah, whatever you can do to listen, do it.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Tina. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. We'll send out a note with the resources that we've talked about. I hope we see you on a future elections group webinar. I hope you share these with your communities. Thank you, and happy Friday Eve. See y'all later.